My name is Teresa Larkin. I'm 68 years old, a retired librarian in the small town of Maple Hollow, Vermont. I still remember that night, the night my story began. My son left me standing alone in the snow on Christmas Eve while the whole family laughed warmly inside. No one opened the door. I drove back to my cabin and quietly erased his name from every document. 14 days later, they stood at my door desperate. But at that moment, I had no idea that Christmas would change everything. It started with a simple email. No greeting, no warmth, just a few plain words from Lauren. My daughter-in-law Christmas dinner will be at our place as usual, around 5 p.m. Hope you can make it. No punctuation beyond the period. No love, no see you soon. It read more like a calendar reminder than an invitation. I wonder if any of you have ever read a message so brief, yet felt that faint pull in your chest, that quiet tightening ache that tells you you're no longer part of the story. I looked out the window at the bare trees bending in the wind, and even after all that, I still replied, "Thank you. I'll be there." I typed it slowly, carefully, as if pressing too hard might break something fragile. I didn't ask if they needed anything. I didn't offer to bring food or help prepare. I've learned better by now. They had spent years teaching me where the boundary was, and this time I wouldn't trip over it trying to make things easier for them. Those thoughts never help. They only reopen old wounds. The clock ticked in the silence. I glanced at the corner cabinet where a box of ornaments sat unopened. I hadn't bothered to decorate. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. The invitation was cold, but I was still going because sometimes, even when the door is only half open, we still step through it hoping. I began measuring sugar, flour, salt. The kitchen slowly filled with warmth, the scent of nutmeg floating in the air. The radio played a faint Christmas song. For a moment, time folded. I was 30 again, singing while baking pies. But time has its own way of teaching us that memory isn't a home. It's just a room you can visit, never stay in. I rolled the dough, carefully brushed it with milk, and placed the pie in the oven. While it baked, I reached for the basket of yarn scarves I had started, but never finished promises I hadn't delivered. I chose the red one, warm, deep, durable, and began knitting a scarf for Abby, my granddaughter. Each loop of yarn was a thought, each knot a memory of the first time I held her. Her tiny hand had wrapped around my thumb. Now, whenever I visit, she barely looks at me. Children seek warmth. I am no longer a hearth. When the pie was done, the sweet scent filled my little cabin, gentle and forgiving. I turned off the oven, wiped my hands, and reached for an old photo album. Inside were decades of life birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, Michael's first steps, his first library card. I'd kept everything, even the faded pictures. I only wanted to give him something that reminded him that he was raised on love, not just money. I placed the pie, the scarf, and the album in a fabric tote, then slipped in a light blue card that read, "For the family who once made my winters warm." I didn't mean it to sting, I only wanted to stir memory. Before leaving, I called Earl Peterson, my neighbor, 70 widowed former fire chief voice, rough as gravel. He answered after 2 rings. "Teresa, baking again I am, taking a pie to Michael's for Christmas." He chuckled softly. "Don't stay out too long. The snow around here forgives no one." I smiled. Neither do mothers, Earl. He laughed the kind of laugh that hides an old wound. Before hanging up, he said, "If you get tired of being polite, my cabin's got hot cocoa and terrible movies." "I'll keep that in mind," I replied. By evening, the sky turned silver. I put on my heavy coat, set the gift bag in the back seat of my old Subaru, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the falling snow, tiny ghosts swirling around me. The road wound through pine woods, quiet except for the crunch of tires over ice. Halfway there, the radio faded to static. All that remained was the wind and my own breathing. In that silence, a thought surfaced. Clear, cold, simple, I had raised a man who loved control more than connection, and I was the one who taught him that love would always wait. Maybe that was my mistake. When I reached his neighborhood, the houses glowed with Christmas lights, red, blue, gold. But Michael's house shone the brightest, the glow of success, masking what lay beneath. I parked carefully along the curb. Through the window, I saw movement, laughter, clinking glasses, a table set like a magazine spread. I wrapped the scarf tighter around my neck, took the bag, and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier. Snow clung to my lashes. Standing there, I hesitated. Through the glass, I saw Michael, Lauren, the warmth that once belonged to me. I rang the bell once. The chime echoed inside. Then silence. I rang again. A shadow crossed the hallway, then vanished. No one came. I waited a full minute. The wind howled under the porch. My fingers went numb. Through the frosted glass, laughter flickered, a raised glass, a turned head, a flash of earrings. Finally, the door cracked open. Michael stood there, face flushed from wine eyes uneasy. "Mom, you made it." "Yes," I said softly. "I brought pie." He didn't take it. From inside, Lauren's voice called, "Who is it, honey?" "It's my mom," he answered without turning. Then quieter, "I told you she might come." I felt those words before I even heard them. They landed heavy in my chest. He cleared his throat. "It's really crowded tonight, Mom. Maybe next week." I looked past him into the light. Abby sat near the tree holding wrapping paper. When she saw me, she waved distractedly, then turned back to her toys. I nodded. "All right," I whispered. "Next week, then." Lauren stepped closer, placing a hand on her husband's arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. He nodded, glanced at me, a mix of guilt and relief. "Mom," she said gently, "it's freezing out here. You shouldn't be standing there." Ironic, really, she was right. It was cold out there. But the chill outside was kinder than the one inside that house. He closed the door softly, politely, as if gentleness could make cruelty less cruel. The world went still. Only the soft patter of snow remained. I stood there until my legs went numb and whispered I didn't know yet that the warmest place in town would feel the coldest. Snow covered the porch like a frozen sea. My boots sank deep. The cold crawled up my legs. Through the window, the house glowed golden, the kind of light that once meant welcome. Now it only reminded me I was outside of it. Laughter echoed faintly, muffled by walls and distance. The kind of laughter people use to fill silence, not to share joy. My hands trembled as I tightened my grip on the gift bag. I stood still, watching their shadows move behind the curtains. Michael passed by, tall, confident head, tilted in that familiar way when he explained things. Lauren followed beside him, her hair catching the light. They looked like a photograph torn from a glossy magazine, perfect, polished, private. The wind cut against my cheek. Then I turned, walked back to my car, and drove into the dark. Through the windshield, I saw their house fade behind me, full of light laughter, and a life that no longer included me. For a moment, I thought about turning back, knocking, forcing them to look at me. But I didn't, because I had learned that dignity doesn't need to shout. It only needs to walk away. Streetlights stretched across the snow like ribbons of gold. The houses blurred into a warm world I no longer belonged to. My voice, steady and calm, whispered inside me. Books taught me empathy. People taught me the price of it. The heater groaned. The pie on the passenger seat slid slightly. The ribbon came undone. I kept driving deeper into the winter night, back to my small cabin, humble, quiet, honest. Behind me, laughter dissolved into the wind. Ahead, the forest opened wide and dark. And in that darkness, I found a strange kind of peace, the kind that comes only when a heart has been frozen long enough to stop waiting for warmth. By the time I reached my cabin, the road behind me had disappeared under the snow. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches bending under white weight. When I opened the door, the familiar creak greeted me like an old friend. Inside, the air was still. Only the faint tick of the wall clock broke the silence. I hung my coat on the hook, brushed snow from my boots, and lit the oil lamp. The flame flickered, throwing soft circles of light across the wooden walls. I set the kettle on the stove. Soon the gentle hiss of boiling water filled the room, and I poured myself a cup of tea. Chamomile. Always chamomile. It was the only thing that could slow my heartbeat when memories tried to run wild. On the table sat a stack of folders wrapped in a leather strap. They had been waiting for me for years, patient and quiet like ghosts that refused to leave. Each one carried Michael's name, printed, signed, embossed, repeated. A record of a life built together. A record of how much I gave. I pulled the first folder closer. The paper inside smelled faintly of dust and ink. The bank logo sat at the top. Below it, my handwriting neat, deliberate, and next to it, his crooked, eager 11 years old. I remembered that day. He was standing beside me at the bank counter, feet barely reaching the floor. "Can I really sign it, Mom?" he asked, eyes wide. "Yes," I said, smiling. "It's your account. For your future." The clerk handed him a pen too big for his hand. He gripped it tightly, pressing so hard the tip tore the paper. But his grin was proud, like he had just planted a flag on the moon. Back then, I believed signing together meant belonging together, that signatures could bind hearts the way they bound contracts. How wrong I was. I took a deep breath and opened the next folder. The sound of paper echoed in the quiet room, a sound that was both comforting and cruel. Insurance, property, pension. Everything bore his name next to mine. The pen beside me felt heavy, almost alive. I picked it up. Its tip scratched the paper as I drew a single dark line through Michael Larkin. Then another, and another. The ink bled slightly, spreading like veins through the paper fibers. I watched it soak, deliberate, slow. Rip. The first page came out clean, then the second. Each tear was small, precise, like stitches being removed after a long healing. I didn't rush. I wanted to feel every sound, every breath, every motion of letting go. Outside, the wind pressed against the window, whispering in broken tones. Snowflakes tapped the glass like someone politely knocking. I turned to the fireplace. A single log burned low, its light orange and unsteady. It reminded me of the night Michael graduated, how proud I had been when he said he wanted to study law. He told me, "Mom, I'll make sure you never worry about a thing." And I believed him. Every parent wants to believe their child's promises are sacred, but promises, I learned, have an expiration date. I reached for another folder. This one held the deed to the lake cabin, the very room I sat in now, bought with my savings, signed by both our names. Joint ownership, the lawyer had called it. Joint. A word that sounds warm until one side lets go. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, then reached for my fountain pen again. The nib touched the page, tracing carefully through each letter of his name. It was not anger that guided my hand, it was clarity. When I was done, I whispered to the quiet room, it wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping for my own soul. The words felt heavier than they looked. They filled the air, slow and truthful. I turned the page to the will, the same pattern, his name beside mine, again and again, like an echo that refused to fade. I marked each one out, deliberate calm, not erasing him from memory, but from control. Every stroke of ink was an act of reclamation, a declaration that I could still own my story even if I no longer owned his love. The kettle whistled softly in the background. I poured another cup, the tea now darker, stronger. Steam rose curling like smoke from a candle. A photograph slipped out from between the pages, one I hadn't seen in years. Michael at 8, holding a library card, missing a front tooth, smiling wide. I had taken that picture the day he borrowed his first book on dinosaurs. He had told me books are like treasure maps, Mom. They show you where to dig. I traced the outline of his face with my finger, then placed the photo aside. Not in the trash, not in the folder, just aside. I began organizing the new documents I had prepared months ago. A new will, a trust in my name only. Beneficiary the Lantern. Women's Foundation, a small charity helping older women rebuild their lives. When I first signed it, I wasn't sure if I'd ever go through with changing everything. Tonight I knew. The decision no longer felt harsh. It felt clean. I wrote slowly, carefully, each letter. Steady. Teresa Larkin. Alone, unshared, complete. I signed my name once more, not beside his, but beneath my own. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the flame trembled. For a moment, I imagined the world beyond the window, the bright, noisy house where my family feasted. Then I looked down at my own table tea-pen papers and peace. Maybe this was what freedom really looked like. Not loud, not celebrated, but quiet, methodical, earned. I gathered the marked papers, tied them back with the leather strap, and placed them inside the drawer. When I closed it, a small cloud of dust rose shimmering in the lamplight. The clock ticked on each second, crisp and patient. The sound was no longer lonely. It was alive, a reminder that time kept moving even when love stopped. I leaned back in the chair, letting the wood creak beneath me. The tea had cooled, but I drank it anyway. Bitterness, warmth, and calm all in one sip. Outside, the storm deepened. The lamp flickered once, twice. Then the wind found a gap in the window frame and swept through the room strong enough to snuff the flame. Darkness swallowed everything. I didn't relight it. I just sat there, eyes open, letting the silence become light enough to see by. The storm had passed by morning. What remained was silence, the kind that hums softly when the world has just been scrubbed clean. Outside my window, the forest shimmered. Snow clung to the pine branches like powdered sugar on cookies. I sat at the table with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching steam rise from my half-empty teacup. The fire in the hearth had died sometime before dawn, but the embers still glowed faintly, a stubborn orange heartbeat refusing to quit. A knock came at the door, 3 sharp raps followed by one lighter, like a drum rhythm someone had practiced. Only one man in Maple Hollow knocked that way. Earl Peterson, I muttered, smiling to myself. I opened the door, and there he stood, cheeks pink from the cold, his knit hat tilted too far back on his head. He was holding 2 thermos mugs, both steaming, both dented from years of loyal service. "Mornin', librarian lady," he said, handing me one. "Hot cocoa, doctor's orders. Prevents frostbite of the soul." I laughed a sound that surprised even me. "Does it come with marshmallows?" He winked. "Double dose." I took the mug. The metal was warm against my palms. The cocoa, rich and thick, just sweet enough to make the air around us feel human again. Earl stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, a habit I never stopped him from keeping. He looked around at the open folders scattered on the table, the pen still resting on top of them. Then, with the ease of a man who had earned the right to tease me, he asked, "You planning to burn those papers or just their memories?" I smirked. "Neither. Just filing them under finished business." He gave a low whistle. "That sounds final." "It is." He nodded slowly, eyes softening. "About time, Teresa." We sat down at the table. The wood creaked in protest beneath us. For a while, the only sound was the faint clink of spoons stirring cocoa. Outside, the snow on the roof slipped and fell, thudding softly against the porch. Earl leaned back, balancing his chair on 2 legs like a teenager. So he said, "Heard you made a dramatic exit last night. The town grapevine's faster than a fire alarm." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't think anyone noticed. Small towns always notice," he said. "They just pretend they don't till they can retell it better." I chuckled. "Then they'll have plenty of room for embellishment." He smiled. Then his face changed softer, almost wistful. "You know, you're not the only one with a kid who forgets phone numbers." I looked up. "Your daughter." He nodded, eyes fixed on the fireplace. 3 states away. Last I heard, she moved again. Sent me a card last Christmas that said, "Hope you're doing well." He shrugged. She didn't sign her name. Just Dad. Like it was optional. For a moment, the air between us stilled. There's a quiet kind of grief that doesn't need words. It just breathes next to you until it becomes familiar. I reached across the table, touched his wrist lightly. "I'm sorry, Earl." He smiled faintly. "Don't be. She's living her life. And I've got mine. I make cocoa. I shovel snow. I talk to my dog like he's a war veteran. You don't have a dog." He grinned. "That's what makes it interesting." The laugh burst out of me before I could stop it. It wasn't polite laughter, it was full, sharp, and real. The kind of laugh that catches you off guard and forces your shoulders to shake. Earl joined in the sound of it, filling the small cabin like a warm draft. Outside, a bird took off from a branch, startled by the sudden joy. When the laughter finally died, I wiped my eyes and sighed. "It feels strange to laugh after last night." He nodded knowingly. "That's how healing sneaks in. Not through apologies, through laughter that you don't expect." I looked at him, at his weathered hands wrapped around the cocoa mug, at the lines on his face, carved by years of smoke and winter. He looked like the kind of man who'd been through his own storms and decided to keep walking anyway. "Earl," I said quietly, "do you ever feel like the world just forgets people our age exist?" He blew on his drink, then chuckled. "Only when I try to use an iPhone." I smiled. "No, I mean really forgets. Like we become invisible unless we're needed." He nodded. "Yeah. Sometimes it feels like we're snow people notice when we first fall, but by morning we've already been shoveled aside." His words hung there, true and simple. I didn't try to add to them. Some sentences are already complete. He finished his cocoa and stood. "Well before the sun goes down, I should clear your steps, unless you want to make the evening news for slipping on your own porch." I rolled my eyes. "I can handle snow." He winked. "Sure, but can the snow handle you?" Before I could respond, he stepped outside, still laughing. Through the window, I watched him grab the shovel and start scraping the path. He moved like a man trying to prove to himself that he still could. Then, as if scripted by fate, his boot hit a patch of ice. His arms flailed, the shovel flew, and Earl Peterson retired. Fire chief and part-time philosopher landed squarely on his back in a pile of snow. I gasped, rushed to the door, but then I heard him laughing. Loud, ridiculous, unashamed laughter. The kind that bounces off the trees and makes the whole world feel a little less cruel. I stood at the door holding my breath, and then to my own surprise, I started laughing too. It wasn't polite or delicate. It was the kind of laughter that thaws something frozen inside your chest. When I reached him, he was still lying there, grinning like a fool. "See?" He set his hat half covered in snow. "The ground and I are just reconnecting. Old friends." I held out my hand. "You're impossible." He took it, and together we both slipped again, collapsing into another heap of laughter. The world spun for a moment. White sky, white snow, and the warm sound of two people refusing to give up on joy. When we finally caught our breath, we sat there side by side looking out toward the frozen lake. The air was crisp, sharp, honest. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel completely alone. "Earl," I said softly, "thank you." He smiled. "For what?" "For reminding me that I can still laugh in the cold." He raised his mug, half spilled but still steaming. To laughter, he said, "The cheapest form of survival." I raised mine in return. "To survival," I said. "The most expensive kind of laughter." We clinked the mugs together. The sound was small, but it echoed bright and certain across the snow-covered morning. By mid-morning, the sky over Maple Hollow was the color of tin, the kind of gray that promised snow but hadn't yet decided when to fall. I wrapped my scarf, twice locked the cabin, and started the car. The engine coughed awake, old but dependable like its owner. The road into town shimmered with ice. Pines bowed slightly toward one another, forming an archway of white silence. I'd driven this route for 30 years, to the library, to the market, to the bank, where my life's paper trail lived. Today, that trail would end. When I pushed open the glass door of First Maple Bank, a gust of warm air hit my face. Christmas garlands still hung around the counters, half wilted. A tired instrumental version of Let It Snow played through ceiling speakers. It felt almost sarcastic. Behind the counter, Nancy Klein, 40 efficient, always chewing peppermint gum, looked up. Her smile froze when she saw the folder in my hands. "Mrs. Larkin, you're early for your quarterly appointment." "Not an appointment, Nancy," I said, setting the folder down. "A conclusion." She blinked. What now? I need to close all joint accounts under my name and my son's. Every card, every automatic transfer, every recurring payment. Today. Her pen slipped from her fingers. All of them. Are you sure, positive? I said. Leave nothing that requires my signature alongside anyone else's. Nancy's professionalism kicked in like muscle memory. She turned to her computer, typing fast, her red nails clacking like tiny hammers of liberation. I'll need authorization on each account. You'll have to initial next to every closure. I brought my pen. She smiled nervously. Well, that's commitment. One by one, the pages slid toward me, checking savings home equity line, each bearing that same combination, Teresa Larkin and Michael Larkin. I uncapped my pen. The sound of it scratching across the paper was soft but decisive. A chorus of endings disguised as ordinary ink. Nancy glanced up. If you don't mind me asking, everything okay with your family? I met her eyes and smiled. Everything's fine now. She looked unconvinced but didn't push further. That's all the financial accounts, she said at last. Do you want to keep your safety deposit box? For now, I said. It still holds a few memories I haven't decided to forgive yet. Nancy chuckled awkwardly. Well, forgiveness takes time. No, I said gently. It takes clarity. I signed the last page and pushed it toward her. She stamped each one with a heavy thunk that echoed off the marble counter. It sounded like a heartbeat learning a new rhythm. When it was over, she exhaled. There. Official. You're free, Mrs. Larkin. The word free lingered longer than it should have. For years, I'd thought freedom came from forgiveness or faith. But today, I'd found it in paperwork and ink. From the bank, I drove across the square to the law office of Richard Boyd. A brass plaque beside the door still read, Trusts, Estates, and Family Settlements. The irony didn't escape me. Inside, Richard was on the phone, sleeves rolled up, tie loose. He looked up, saw my face, and immediately ended the call. Well, if it isn't my favorite librarian, don't tell me someone finally lost your overdue book records. His humor had survived 2 divorces and a tax audit. I smiled. Not yet, but today I'm editing my own story. He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. The kind of edit that involves lawyers, I hope. I slid the folder toward him. Transfer everything to the Lantern Women Foundation. Assets, property, trust, income. Effective immediately. He adjusted his glasses. Everything, Teresa? That's considerable. I've considered it. He opened the folder and whistled low. This includes the Maple Ridge property. Yes. And the college fund. Also, yes. It'll help someone who still believes in education. Richard leaned back. May I ask why now? Because 14 days ago, I said I stood in the snow outside a house I paid for and realized I didn't belong there anymore. He didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. Then let's make sure the paperwork matches your revelation. He turned to his computer, fingers flying. The printer hummed. Fresh pages slid out crisp and smelling faintly of ozone and ink, the scent of transformation. He read aloud as he typed, Transfer of ownership effective January 1st, establishing a perpetual endowment for retired caregivers, particularly women over 60. He looked up. Sound right. Exactly right. When he printed the final draft, he handed me a pen, a fountain pen, heavy and elegant, the kind that made every signature feel like an oath. Initial here, here, and here. I signed steady-handed while snow began to drift past the window behind him. Each signature felt like a stitch, pulling together the torn edges of something long ignored. Richard sealed the documents with a notary stamp. The sound of the metal press locking down made my pulse quicken. He handed me the last page. You've done something remarkable, Teresa. It's not remarkable, I said. It's arithmetic. I'm just balancing the ledger of my life. He smiled. Still, most people don't find courage in forms and signatures. I took the copy and slipped it into my bag. They should. Paper has more power than people realize. Wars end with ink, not swords. He laughed softly. "Remind me never to play chess with you." As I rose to leave, he added, "You know, if you ever need someone on the foundation board," I stopped at the door. "You'll be first on my list. After all, you know where all the bodies are buried." He laughed again, shaking his head. "Go before I bill you for emotional labor." Outside, the snow had finally committed. It fell in thick, deliberate flakes, softening every hard line in sight. Cars, curbs, rooftops, regrets. The whole town looked washed in forgiveness. I stood beneath a streetlight, watching the flakes swirl through its golden beam. Each one landed silently, claiming its piece of ground without asking permission. I thought of the papers in my bag, stamped and sealed. Justice quiet and invisible, already in motion. No shouting, no revenge, just ink and resolve. A car passed slowly, tires crunching over slush. A child pressed her nose to the back window, eyes wide, staring at the snow like it was falling for her alone. I smiled. The world, I realized, always starts over this way softly on blank pages. I whispered into the cold air, letting my breath curl into the night. Snow covers everything equally, even shame. And for the first time in years, I felt clean. By Tuesday morning, Maple Hollow had already done what Maple Hollow always did best: gossip. News traveled faster than snowmelt, especially when it involved money, morality, and a woman who refused to stay in her lane. When I stopped by the library that afternoon, the air smelled of old paper and lemon cleaner. Maya Patel, our young librarian, 26 bright eyes, eternally mismatched socks, greeted me with a grin so wide it could have cracked ice. Well, if it isn't the woman of the week," she said. "Word around town is you walked into the bank and started a one-woman revolution." I raised an eyebrow. "A revolution requires followers." "Oh, you've got them," Maya said, whispering theatrically. "Half the women from the book club came in asking if they can close their joint accounts too. Miss Larkin's rebellion is trending small-town edition." I laughed, the sound surprising even to me. I didn't mean to start anything. "That's what every good revolutionary says before Chapter 2, she replied. We both chuckled. The irony wasn't lost on me, decades of silence, and now suddenly I was the talk of the town. Maya handed me a book I'd requested weeks ago, Women Who Built Themselves. Then she added, "By the way, the mayor's office called. He wants you to attend the town reading this Friday. Says your recent actions inspired him." "Did he now?" I asked, amused. "He once fined me for keeping my Christmas lights up too long. Maybe he's seen the light," Maya said with mock solemnity. The idea lingered in my mind as I walked home through Main Street, snow crunching under my boots. People waved, some out of politeness, some out of curiosity. It was odd being noticed again. Not as someone's mother or widow or forgotten librarian, just me. The next day, I found Earl on my porch, hammer in hand, staring at my roof like it had insulted him. "Your shingles are hanging on by faith alone," he said. "Let me fix it before they file for divorce." "I thought you gave up handyman work," I teased. "I did," he said, grinning. "But boredom is louder than retirement." I brought him coffee while he climbed up. The sky had turned a heavy silver. The wind picked up playful at first. From below, I heard him hum an old country tune, then shout down, "You know, folks are saying you pulled your money out just to spite Michael." I smirked. "Let them talk. If paperwork scares them, that's their conscience, not mine." He laughed. "You might have done more damage to local patriarchy than the last 3 elections combined." I leaned against the porch post, warmth creeping up my chest despite the cold. Earl always had that effect, turning heaviness into humor, loneliness into something almost bearable. Suddenly, a gust of wind howled through the trees. The metal sheet Earl had just loosened rattled violently. "Hold on," I shouted. He tried to grab it, but the gust hit harder. The roof moaned, the ladder wobbled. For a terrifying second, I thought I'd lose him to a patch of ice and bad timing. Then, with one decisive swing, Earl slammed the hammer down, pinning the sheet in place. "Ha, who's in charge now?" he yelled into the storm. I clapped my gloved hands, laughing despite my heart pounding. "Congratulations, you just won an argument with the wind." He looked down, cheeks flushed, grin wide. "And you witnessed it. I'll need that for my obituary." By the time he climbed down, snow had begun to fall again, light feathery, the kind that looks harmless until you realize how deep it piles. Earl brushed off his jacket. "There, good as new. You risked your life for a $70 roof," I said. He winked. "I charge extra for drama." We stood side by side, breath-forming clouds in the cold air. The cabin looked sturdier now, not just the wood, but the feeling of it like it had found its defender. Later that evening, I sat by the fire listening to the wind settle. The day's absurdity, Maya's jokes, the mayor's invitation, Earl's near flight all swirled together into something I hadn't felt in years' aliveness. It struck me that for so long I'd equated solitude with punishment, as if being alone meant being forgotten. But that night, surrounded by flickering light and the faint smell of cocoa Earl had spilled on my porch, I realized something simpler. Solitude isn't emptiness. It's space. Space to rebuild, space to breathe, space to laugh at the absurdity of almost losing a roof to the weather and a friend to his own stubbornness. I looked out the window. The snow had started again heavier, now flakes spiraling like tiny pieces of paper, each one unique, each one fleeting. Some landed on the window pane, melted, instantly gone before I could blink, but others clung just long enough to leave their trace a perfect white silhouette. For the first time, I didn't fear how temporary everything was. Not the snow, not my name whispered in town gossip, not even the echo of a son who no longer called. I was still here, heart beating, pen steady, foundation forming. And somehow that was enough. I whispered into the quiet room, half to myself, half to the world beyond the glass. Let them talk. I finally have something worth being talked about. The fire popped in reply. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering Maple Hollow once again, evenly, silently, beautifully. It was the 14th night after Christmas Eve, the kind of cold that didn't ask permission before coming in. It just claimed the air, the windows, the bones. The storm had started at dusk. By midnight, the world outside my cabin was a blur of white, the trees bending under the weight of snow. I sat near the fire, a cup of chamomile steaming in my hands, reading an old library ledger. Every page was a memory of names, dates, borrowed books, promises of return. That's when I heard it. A knock. No, not a knock, a pounding. Sharp. Desperate. Human. I set the cup down, the liquid trembling like it sensed the shift before I did. Another thud, harder this time. Through the storm's roar, a muffled voice cried out, "Mom, please open the door." For a second, I thought it was memory playing tricks. But then I heard it again. Michael's voice, raw and hoarse. I walked to the door, hand trembling slightly, and pulled the latch. Wind exploded in biting and violent. Snowflakes swirled like glass shards. And there they were, Michael, Lauren, and little Abby. Michael's face was pale, his breath thick smoke in the freezing air. Lauren clung to her coat mascara, streaked eyes wide with panic. Abby, bundled in a pink jacket, hugged her doll so tight her knuckles were white. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the storm did screaming, unrelenting. Finally, Michael whispered, "We need help." I stared at him, my voice calm. "I gave you help, Michael. I gave you years." He stepped forward, snow falling from his shoulders. "Mom, please. The accounts, they're frozen. The mortgage, the bank's coming for the house." Lauren added quickly, "It's not fair. They said you transferred everything." Her voice cracked like the ice on the steps. Behind them, Earl appeared bundled in his heavy parka snow shovel in hand. He must have heard the noise from his cabin next door. He didn't say a word, just stood there, broad and steady, the kind of silence that made others straighten up. Michael's eyes darted between us. "We're begging you. Just until we get things back on track." I looked at the three of them, the faces that had once been my entire world. The boy I raised, the woman who'd married him, the child I dreamed of reading bedtime stories to. And I saw fear there, but not the kind that humbles. the kind that arrives too late. "Do you remember that night?" I asked quietly. Michael frowned. "What Christmas Eve?" I said, voice steady as the snow fell, "when I stood outside your door." He blinked. "Mom, that we were overwhelmed." "So was I said softly. "The difference is I stood in it alone." The words hung in the air like frost. Earl shifted beside me, his presence grounding the scene. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean it wasn't like that." Abby looked up, small voice trembling. "Grandma, I'm cold." That one sentence almost undid me. Almost. I knelt down, meeting her eyes. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be out here. Your parents should have kept you warm." Michael flinched. "Mom, please don't punish her for our mistakes." I rose slowly. "Punishment isn't my job. Consequence is." The fire behind me glowed against the frost-covered windows, casting golden light over the floor, a warmth they couldn't quite reach. Lauren wiped her cheeks. "We're losing everything." I nodded. "So was I. The night you shut the door." Earl stepped closer, shovel resting on his shoulder. His tone was mild, but his stance was protective. "Maybe it's time you folks headed back before the road closes." Michael shook his head. "Please, Earl, stay out of this," Can't Earl said. "You're on her porch, and she's under my watch tonight." A flicker of anger crossed Michael's face, then vanished, replaced by exhaustion. He looked at me again, his voice cracking for the first time. "I'm sorry. I thought you'd always be there." I took a breath, long and even. I was, until I learned that love without respect is just servitude. The wind howled louder, slamming into the walls like a living thing. Lauren sobbed quietly. Abby shivered. Earl glanced at me, a silent question in his eyes. "Do you want to end this?" I stepped forward, the snow crunching under my boots. I took Abby's hand for a moment, pulling off my glove and tucking it around hers. Then I said gently, "You should go home, honey. I'll send someone to check on you tomorrow." Abby nodded, eyes wide. She didn't understand, but she felt something shift. I turned to Michael. "The paperwork is done, son. Everything now belongs to the Lantern Women Foundation. It helps women who have nowhere to go when the door closes on them. The irony isn't lost on me." His lips trembled. "You're saying we have nothing. I'm saying," I replied, "you have each other. That's more than you thought I deserved that night." For a long moment, the only sound was the storm, relentless, uncaring, but cleansing. Finally, Michael nodded, his chin trembling. He took Abby's hand, guiding her down the steps. Lauren followed, shoulders shaking. Before he reached the end of the path, he turned back. "I really am sorry, Mom." I looked at him through the snow. "I believe you. But belief and forgiveness are different currencies. You can't withdraw one to pay for the other." He lowered his head, then disappeared into the white. Earl stood beside me, both of us silent as the wind carried their footprints away. He finally spoke. "You handled that like a general." I exhaled slowly. "No, like a librarian. I just closed the last overdue account." He laughed, a deep, warm sound that cut through the storm. "Remind me never to miss a return date with you." We went inside. I shut the door, not out of anger, but out of peace. The sound of the lock clicking was softer than forgiveness, but heavier than closure. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing everything, tracks, shame, and the remnants of that night. For the first time in years, I didn't feel cold. Morning came quietly after the storm. The world outside my cabin looked reborn, every branch glazed in white, every sound softened by snow. I stood by the window, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the first streak of sunlight cut through the frost. It had been 14 days since I stood alone in the snow. 14 days since I erased my son's name from every document. 14 days since silence had finally learned how to speak. Then came another knock, softer this time. Not desperate, just hesitant. I opened the door to find Michael and Lauren again. Their faces were calmer now, washed clean of the storm, but still pale like the snow that never fully melts. Behind them, Earl stood quietly. Shovel in one hand, thermos in the other. He'd seen them arrive and followed wordless like a witness summoned by instinct. Michael spoke first. "Mom, we came to return something." Lauren held out a small envelope crumpled at the edges. Inside was a check the balance from one of the accounts I'd closed. Her hands trembled. We didn't know what else to do with it. I took the envelope, glanced at the amount, then slid it back to her. "Keep it. You'll need it more than I will." She hesitated. "We don't deserve it." "No," I said softly, "but your daughter does. Use it wisely." Michael swallowed hard. "Mom, I still don't understand. Why give it all away? The house, the savings." I turned toward the mantel where the documents lay, waiting a neat stack sealed in a larger envelope tied with red string. "I was hoping you'd ask that." I handed it to him. He opened it slowly, pulling out the certificate of incorporation for the Lantern Women Foundation. His eyes scanned the words, disbelief flooding his face. "You turned the house into a foundation." "Yes," I said. "It's no longer ours. It belongs to those who have nowhere to go when family turns cold." Lauren's voice broke. "You gave it away." I met her eyes steady, unflinching. "No, I gave it meaning." The silence that followed was heavy, sacred almost. Even the fire crackled more softly, as if listening. Michael's lips parted, but no sound came. He just stared at the document, the gold seal glinting under the cabin light. He finally whispered, "I thought you wanted to leave me something." "I did," I said, "but you taught me something better. That legacy isn't what we keep, it's what we create." Earl stepped closer, then resting a hand on the shovel like it was a staff. "Well," he said dryly, "if sainthood's on your list, you just qualified." Lauren let out a sound, half sob, half laugh. "I don't know if I should thank you or hate you. You can start with understanding," I said gently. "That would be enough." She nodded, wiping her face with a tissue. Abby's name was scribbled on the corner of her glove in pink marker, a reminder of innocence still worth saving. I looked at Michael again. When I stood outside your house that night, the cold didn't bother me. The silence did. I realized then that love without kindness is just noise. He looked down. "I wish I could take that night back." "You can't," I said, "but you can learn from it." He folded the paper carefully as if it might burn him and tucked it into his coat. "I'll make it right somehow." "You will," I said, "just not by repaying me, by raising your daughter differently." Lauren sniffed, her voice small. "What if we fail again?" "Then try again," I said. "The only true failure is pretending you don't know better." Outside, the light shifted. The snow on the porch reflected golden, a quiet halo around the four of us. Earl, sensing the end of something, cleared his throat. "Well, I'll be next door if anyone needs a sermon or a snowplow." Michael managed a faint smile. "Thanks, Earl." Earl tipped his cap. "Don't thank me, son. Thank the woman who didn't let you freeze out there twice." He stepped back into the snow, leaving 3 clean footprints before the wind filled them in. Inside, Lauren turned to me once more. "You're really not angry." I shook my head. "Anger is heavy. I've carried it long enough. Now I carry purpose." Michael looked around the cabin, the shelves lined with old books, the soft ticking of the clock, the quiet dignity of the space. "It's warm here," he said softly. "It always was," I replied. "You just never opened the door." That was when his eyes glistened. He nodded, once tight-lipped, then took Lauren's hand. "I'll tell Abby that her grandma built something good. Tell her I said that her grandma finally built herself." He hesitated at the threshold, looking back one last time. "Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Michael." They stepped out into the white, their silhouettes fading into the light snow. For a moment, I just stood there, hand on the doorknob, heart both full and emptied. Then I closed the door. The lock clicked softly, not a sound of finality, but of peace. Inside, the fire flared brighter, reflecting in the framed photo of a younger me and a boy, holding a library card. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter, maybe theirs, maybe the world's. Either way, it didn't matter. I walked to the lamp on my desk and turned it higher. The room glowed warmer. The documents on the mantel caught the light gold seal shining like a small sun. For the first time in years, I realized something simple and profound. When you give away what once defined you, you finally see who you are. And so I sat down by the fire, a quiet woman in a warm room, letting the world outside fade into white peace. 1 week later, Maple Hollow thawed just enough for people to gather. Snow still trimmed the sidewalks like lace. The library windows glowed a calm amber that could be seen from the square. Inside, tables were dressed with cotton runners and tin lanterns. Each lantern held a slow candle. Each candle held a quiet promise. Maya had staged the room like a winter chapel. There were wicker baskets of paperbacks. There were thermoses of black tea and cinnamon cocoa. There were cards with simple words, "Welcome, sit, breathe." Earl set a yellow snow shovel by the door like a ceremonial staff. He said it doubled as security and slapstick. I told him we might need both. The sign over the front display read, "Lantern Women Foundation, Opening Night." Beneath it sat a wooden box with envelopes labeled "Stories." Women would slip in a page as they left. No names were required. Truth did not need a signature. By 6, the first guests arrived. Coats shook. Boots squeaked. Laughter returned to a building that knew how to hold it. I stood near the desk with my hands open. Old habits die soft. Librarians learn to greet with palms, not rules. They came in 2s and 3s, widows who learned how to change furnace filters, grandmothers who lost Christmas to someone else's schedule, nurses who retired and discovered their phones went silent. They did not arrive empty. They brought pies and scarves and those fragile sentences that live under the ribs. Maya floated like a gentle current. She placed a hand on shoulders. She pressed warm cups into cold fingers. She told jokes that landed like feathers. "Tonight the fine for overdue feelings is waived," she whispered. People smiled without defense. Earl checked the furnace once, then twice. He winked at the exit lights as if they were on his crew. "Full compliance," he muttered, pleased. A gust rattled the door. He braced it with his boot and a grin. "Not tonight," he told the wind. We began in a circle. Chairs creaked like they were waking up. Maya rang a small bell from the children's room. The sound folded the space into one clear attention. I went first. "My name is Teresa," I said. "I am 68. I am a librarian. I am learning that quiet can be chosen and not assigned." I felt my voice steady. "We made this foundation for the hour when a door does not open. We made this room to remind the heart that winter ends." A woman named Alma spoke next. She delivered mail for 30 years. She knew every dog on Maple Street by first name. Her son moved west and stopped answering. She held up a butter cookie and laughed softly. "This is my diploma," she said. I baked my way through grief. We clapped like it was commencement. Another woman, Frida, ran the school cafeteria. She kept a notebook of small kindnesses. She read 3 lines from it. One girl who always took apple slices for her mother. One boy who saved a milk carton for a stray kitten. One teacher who said thank you in Spanish even when no one watched. Frida wiped one eye and smiled with the other. "It turns out I was never invisible," she said. "I was just modest." A hush settled. Teacups clicked. Snow tapped the glass with 2 fingers. Our breath synced without trying. Rooms do that when they feel held. Maya nodded at me. It was time for the short address. I stood with my back to the stacks. Paperbacks formed a halo behind me. "Some women wait for doors to open," I said. "We build windows instead." The line left my mouth like a lantern set afloat. Heads lifted, hands pressed, mugs a little closer to hearts. That was when the door opened. Cold air rolled across the carpet. Michael stood there with Abby. He had no script in his eyes. He only had a father's hand on a child's shoulder. Lauren was not with them. Maybe that was mercy for tonight. For a moment, I could not speak. Abby held a book with a rabbit on the cover. Her hat had a bauble that bounced when she breathed. Maya greeted them with ease. She never labeled a late arrival as wrong. She only labeled it as here. Michael's voice was careful. May we sit in the back? Maya pointed to 2 chairs near the globe. Earl shifted his stance by the door and looked at me. His eyes said, your call. My eyes said, let the story proceed. He nodded once. The circle opened again. A retired paramedic named Jean told a small miracle about a roadside birth. She said the child came early and the snow came hard. She kept a heating pad in her kit since then. Not for bodies, she said, for courage. When she finished, Abby's hand rose. Maya crouched to her height. Would you like to share Abby? Nodded and came forward. Her boots squeaked the way hope often does. She stood on the low stool by the bell. She opened the Velveteen Rabbit. Her voice was soft, but it traveled. She read the passage about becoming real, the one where love wears the fur thin, the one where the seams show and the eyes are rubbed off. My throat tightened, but my face stayed calm. I had chosen this piece. Michael watched me as his daughter read. He held his breath like a man at low tide. Guilt bent his shoulders. I let the book lift them. When Abby closed the cover, the room exhaled. No one clapped loud. We clapped like church. Maya handed her a felt star. She pinned it to her coat near the heart. Michael approached with careful steps. He did not ask for old terms. He asked for current language. Thank you for tonight, he said. Abby wanted to see where the lanterns live. I smiled and offered her a cup of cocoa. She blew on it with grave importance. Is this library magic? She asked. Only when children ask the question, I said. She nodded like a judge. The lights flickered once as a gust hit the line. Earl was already moving. He checked the panel with a practiced hand. He tapped, then listened, then tapped again. Stay bright, he told the building. The bulbs obeyed with a warm shiver. People laughed, small and grateful. Crisis had visited and decided to behave. We lit the lanterns one by one. Maya dimmed the overheads until books tucked into shadows like resting birds. Candles lifted the edges of faces. Wrinkles became rivers. Eyes found one another across the glow. Jean whispered an amen that no one needed to translate. I stepped to the center and placed one lantern on the wooden box. This is for letters we were never sent, I said. This is for calls we still deserve. This is for the part of each of us that waited in snow. Earl leaned his shovel in the corner and crossed his arms. He looked like a sentinel in a friendly temple. Then came the smallest comedy. A paper banner slipped from its tape and draped over Earl's shoulder. The word welcome landed across his chest like a sash. He raised one brow and bowed. The room smiled all at once. Relief needs humor to set. Maya cleared her throat with ceremony. Before we close, the foundation has its first gift, she said. She pointed to a cart with 3 heaters and a stack of wool blankets. A local hardware store had donated them. The owner's wife had once been a night nurse. Her note read for the women who kept the nation warm after midnight. We applauded with steady hands. I felt something loosen behind my breastbone. Not forgiveness only, recognition. I was not an exile here. I was a member. I was not a rescuer. I was a builder among builders. Michael lingered as people began to leave. He did not ask for money or mercy. He asked if Abby could volunteer on Saturdays. She can shelve the rabbit books, he said. Only if she files by author, I replied. We both tried not to smile. It still counted as healing. When the last cup had been rinsed, Earl locked the back door. He lifted his shovel again with a dramatic sigh. Ceremony concluded, he announced. Maya saluted with a bookmark. I turned the lanterns low and faced the room. Light pooled across the carpet like melted gold. The shadows were kind. The air was brave. I spoke softly to whoever might still be listening. Some women wait for doors to open. We build windows instead. The words did not need to travel far. They had already found a home. Outside the square was blue with night. Snow fell in patient threads. Abby pressed her mitten to the glass and drew a heart that fogged and cleared. Michael lifted her hood and mouthed, "Thank you," through the pain. I nodded without weight. We stepped into the cold to lock the front. The lanterns shone through the windows like small planets. They did not fight the dark. They taught it how to sit. Maya tucked her arm through mine. Earl stood on my other side like a bookend. The library behind us hummed with afterglow. A foundation had started, but something older had returned. A town remembered how to gather. A woman remembered how to belong. I breathed in air that did not bite. I tasted cinnamon and relief. Legacy was not a house or a check. It was this, a circle of chairs, a book read by a child, a room that knew our names. We walked home under the halo of our own making. Lantern light followed us in the windows until the corner turned. Snow stitched our footprints into one slow line. The night did not feel empty. It felt complete. By the time I reached home that night, the road to the cabin was covered in white silence. Snow had softened every sharp-edge fence posts, tree roots, even the old mailbox leaning like it had something to confess. The world was quiet in a way that only comes after healing. Not the kind of quiet that punishes, the kind that listens. When I stepped onto the porch, I noticed something waiting on the top step. A small lantern, brass and hand-polished, flickered faintly against the wind. Next to it lay a card tucked beneath the handle to keep it from flying away. My name written in Earl's bold firefighter handwriting. I brushed off the snow and read to the brightest librarian in Vermont. From your part-time roof repairman and full-time admirer of courage. I laughed the kind of laugh that comes from the chest, not the throat. Inside the lantern was a single candle, half-burned, still steady. I lifted it, shielding the flame with my hand, and carried it in. The cabin greeted me like an old friend. The faint creak of the floorboards, the smell of cedar and ink, the whisper of the clock that had survived 3 moves and 1 marriage. I set the lantern on the desk near my journal. Its glow joined the firelight in a soft duet of gold. I hung my coat, poured a cup of tea, and sat down. The night was still, the kind of stillness that begs you to write something true. I opened my journal, the same leather one I'd started the winter Michael was born. Its pages were swollen with years of ink, grief, gratitude, and recipes that had more meaning than flavor. I took my pen and began to write slowly, deliberately. Forgiveness isn't letting them back in. It's stopping yourself from waiting outside. I paused, watching the ink dry. Outside the window, snow was falling again, but softer now, gentle flakes spiraling like confetti at the end of a long, patient celebration. I added another line. Love is not an invitation. It's a light you keep lit even when no one else remembers how. The candle in Earl's lantern flickered, reflected in the glass, then steadied as if agreeing. I closed the journal and set the pen beside it. No more writing tonight, no more explaining myself to paper or people. I stood by the window. The world outside was a blank page untouched, forgiving, infinite. The glow from my cabin spilled onto the snow, stretching farther than I expected, catching the trunks of birches, then fading into the forest. Each flake shimmered for a heartbeat, then vanished. The light traveled farther than I could follow, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to chase it. I blew out the lantern, then relit it this time, not to see, but to be seen. The small flame steadied once more, casting shadows that danced with quiet joy. On the mantel beside the photo of my younger self, holding Michael's tiny hand, I placed the lantern and let it glow. The house felt alive. Not because someone was in it, but because someone wasn't anymore. Absence had turned into presence, silence into melody. Justice had come not through revenge, but through light. I sat back down and whispered to the fire. Some doors close for a reason. The lesson isn't to knock harder, it's to build your own light. The logs cracked in answer. Outside, the trees bowed under snow, listening like old friends at the edge of understanding. Through the window, I could see the faint shimmer of the library across the valley. Its lanterns were still burning. Somewhere, Maya was locking up, humming softly. Somewhere Earl was writing another card he'd never admit to rewriting twice. Somewhere Abby was sleeping with the velveteen rabbit under her pillow, and somewhere Michael was staring at his ceiling learning what it meant to start over. I smiled. That was enough. The night deepened, blue, endless, peaceful. I carried the lantern to the porch and placed it on the railing. Its glow joined the stars, trembling but proud. The light spilled over the snow until it blended with the white, becoming indistinguishable, a quiet merging of what was man-made and what was eternal. The wind rose once, then gentled. It moved the flame without extinguishing it. That, I thought, was how strength should look. Somewhere far down the hill, a fox barked. Somewhere nearer, the world breathed out satisfied. I took one last look at the light, then stepped inside and shut the door. It wasn't a wall between me and the world anymore. It was a frame for the life I'd finally chosen. As I turned off the lamp, the lantern outside became the only source of light. It shone against the dark like a punctuation mark at the end of a story, small, firm, necessary. The snow reflected it back, multiplying it until the whole field seemed faintly alive. From above, if anyone had been watching it, might have looked like a single golden star resting on the shoulder of the earth. That thought warmed me more than the fire ever could. I whispered the words once more, not for memory, but for meaning. Some doors close for a reason. The lesson is not to knock harder, but to build your own light. The words echoed softly, finding their place in the silence. A faint glow lingers the lantern still burning in the snow. Then the voice returns, calm and steady. The night may have ended in silence, but silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's the sound of peace returning after years of noise. If this story touched something inside you, if you've ever stood in the cold waiting for kindness that never came, remember this: you are not forgotten. You are the light that keeps burning. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, your city, your country, or just the room where this story found you. Please share as much as possible to help build a sustainable community. Every comment reminds someone else they're not alone in the snow. If you believe in quiet justice and the power of starting over, hit subscribe and join this growing circle of light. Your voice, your story could be the lantern for someone still searching in the dark.